So welcome to this Git Basics workshop with me, Anna. I'm going to be recording this workshop, so that's just a heads up. Some quick introductions. So now that everyone's here, oh, I see there's something in the chat. Okay. So my name's Anna. I'm obviously the one giving the workshop. A bit of my background, I come from a non-technical background. So I actually studied economics at university. Then at some point, I ended up working as a UX designer in London. And then I decided I wanted to learn to code. So I moved to Barcelona and I did a coding boot camp there. And after my coding boot camp, I studied full stack development. And then I decided to specialize in front-end development. So I ended up working as a front-end developer in a luxury fashion company. And there I had to use Git in order to work with my coworkers. And I was honestly terrified of Git. I thought that anytime I had to do something that I deemed was complex using it, I was gonna destroy the repository, I was gonna get fired, I was gonna do something horrible. So I really decided to master it because basically every time I had to do something that I thought was complicated with Git, I had to call over the senior developers to help me, and I was constantly asking for their help. So I decided to master it and to really, really understand it deeply. And while I was learning it, I realized that there really aren't many good resources, many simple resources out there to teach Git to people, especially with non-technical backgrounds. And I felt that a lot of the resources out there were just geared towards people that had been coding since they were like 10 or 15 and didn't explain things in like a humanly understandable way. So I wanted to create a humanly understandable way of teaching it. And this presentation is based on a course that I've created to do that. So just a couple announcements. I'm going to be recording the presentation. I'll make sure not to include anyone's video if they turn their videos on. And then this is also a just watch presentation. In other words, this is not a code along presentation. Just watch. I'm going to present some concepts. I'm going to build a new mental model of Git. But if you're trying to code along at the same time, it's going to be very difficult to be switching screens, and you'll miss a lot of the things that I'm going to share and that I'm going to say. Also, in order to communicate, you can write in the chat. And the duration of this presentation is about half an hour. So it's not too long. Git is quite an intense topic, so it's jam-packed with information, but it's expect about half an hour of content. All right. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover what the difference between Git and GitHub is. I'm going to go over making a commit in depth, and I'm also going to go over the staging area in depth. And the last part of this workshop is going to be about branches. So let's get started. Oh, also, I'm going to be uncovering some misconceptions. I think a lot of us, when we learn Git, we believe some things that are not true. So I'm going to be debunking some of these myths. So what are Git and GitHub? These two are often used interchangeably, and people think that maybe they're kind of the same thing, but they're really not the same thing. So Git is a distributed version control system. It's a program that you download onto your computer. So you have Git on your local machine, on your local computer, and basically Git is a way to track all the versions of your project, to track all your work and to version control it. And it's a way to collaborate with other people on a project. On the other hand, GitHub is a company which allows you to upload your projects that use Git to a remote server somewhere. And GitHub is not something that's downloaded on your computer. So just to demonstrate this, I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to go to my terminal. I'm obviously working on a Mac OS operating system. So I'm going to type in a command, git --version. And this is going to give me the version of Git that I have installed on my computer. So it's telling me that the version of Git that I have on my computer is 2.23. Now, if I typed in GitHub -- version and I pressed enter, my computer's just going to tell me that's not a command. GitHub isn't a program installed on my computer. GitHub is a company that allows me to host my projects that use Git in the cloud. It's kind of like GitHub is like Google Drive and Git is like Microsoft Word. So a program on my computer, that's Git. And we can just quickly check that out. If I open up Chrome and I just type in GitHub, we can see this is the website that I created my account and where I upload my projects that use Git. So I'm going to be going over Git in this presentation. And let's get started with making our first commit. And I'm going to go through this process really in depth. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to create a project folder. In order to do that, I'm going to go onto my desktop. So I'm going to cd onto my desktop. I'm on my desktop now, and I'm going to make a project folder. We're going to see that folder be created over here. I'm going to use the mkdir command, make directory, and I'm going to pass in the name of the project folder that I want to create, which is going to be novel. Press enter, and we can see that that project folder was created. I'm going to open up the file system here, so the Finder window, so that we can actually look at it. So now we're going to initialize a repository in our project folder. Initializing a repository is simply creating a repository. I also want to point out our project folder, another word for it is directory. Directory is the same thing as folder. They're basically interchangeable terms. And I want to point out the concept of hidden files. So in our file system, we have two kinds of files. We have visible files and hidden files. So if I just go to my user, for example, we can see here I have a bunch of folders, right? And these are visible folders. I always see them. But I can also show all the hidden files on my computer. On a Mac operating system, in order to do this, you use Command-Shift-Dot. And now you can see there's these grayed out files. Most of them start with a dot. The name starts with a dot. So if I go back to my folder, we can see that in my folder, in my novel folder, I don't have any visible files and I don't have any hidden files, not yet. Just a quick point for Microsoft Windows computers, in order to see hidden files, you have to change that in your view settings. There's plenty of YouTube videos online that show how to do that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to initialize or create our repository. In order to do that, I'm going to use a command called git init. And when I use this command, we're going to see, oh, my bad. I'm not actually in my project folder. Let's put that in the trash. I need to first go into my project folder. So I'm going to cd into novel. Now I'm in the novel project folder, which is the one I want to work on. And here I want to create my repository. So I'm going to use the git init command, press enter. And you can see that this hidden folder was created, the .git folder. Now inside this folder, we have a bunch of things that may at the moment seem like gibberish, but we'll be touching upon some of this stuff throughout this presentation. So let's go back to the presentation. So many of you will have probably seen these diagrams while you've been learning Git. And I often really feel like these can be quite misleading in teaching how Git works. So right now I'm going to introduce a new mental model of how Git works. So what we just did is we created a project folder, and inside that project folder, we created our .git folder. This is, we initialized our repository. And I want to quickly distinguish between the two. So our project folder is what represents our working directory. The working directory is sort of like a workbench. It's where you have all the files in your project and where you can edit files, add files, and delete files. On the other hand, the .git folder is basically what represents your repository. And within the repository, there are two more spaces that I want to talk about. First of all, we have the staging area. The staging area is kind of like a rough draft space. It's where you add files that you want to then save in the next version of your project. So in the next commit. And you can add files and remove files, but you basically prepare what you want to include in your next version of your project. And then you can make a commit, which goes into your commit history. So that's where all your commits live and their interconnections. So a quick note about commits. Commits are basically like versions of your project. Each commit has a 40-character hash, so 40 letters and numbers that acts kind of like a name for the commit, a way to refer to it. And there's a very common misconception that commits are represent changes in our project, but really they are standalone versions of our project. So commits don't store the changes from one version of our project to another. Commits are standalone versions of our project. So let's go back to the desktop and let's add the first file to our project. I'm going to be using this source code editor, Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open up my novel folder. So in here, I'm going to be editing my files. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the first file, and we're going to see that that file will be added to the project folder. So I'm going to add a file. I'm going to call it chapter1.txt. All right, and I could just add some text here. Chapter 1, and save it. All right. So I've just added a file to my project, and we can see that that file has been added to my project folder here as well. And I'm going to introduce another command now called git status. Now, what the git status command does is it tells us the state of our working directory and of our staging area. And it also tells us whether there's a difference between the two. So if I enter now, what git status is going to tell me is that there's no commits yet. And that's true. I have not made any commits in this project yet. But there is an untracked file, chapter1.txt. So what's this saying to me? It's telling me that there's a file in my working directory, but it's not yet being tracked. In other words, it's not part of my repository, and Git is not version controlling this file. So let's go see that in the presentation. We have our working directory, we have our file in our working directory, but this file is not yet anywhere in our repository. So let's go and add this file to our staging area so that then we can include it in our commit. So we can see that Git is actually telling me how to add this file to the staging area and in order to include in what will be committed. It's telling me to use the git add command and then to pass the name of the file. Before I go ahead and do that, I want to quickly point out that in our .git folder, we don't have a file yet called index. But once I add the first file to my project to the staging area, a file called index will be created, and we'll see that in a second. So I'm going to use this git add command, and then I could pass in the name of the file, chapter1.txt, but instead I'm going to pass in a dot, which basically a dot represents my current directory, my current project folder, and it's going to add all the files in there to my staging area so that if I had many files I wanted to add, I wouldn't have to pass in every single name of each file. So I'm going to do git add dot, it's going to add everything to my staging area. And now if I use, and now we can see that this index file was created. So what is this index file? Basically, index is the same thing as staging area. These are interchangeable terms as well. So our index represents our staging area, And now if we type in git status again to get the status of our working directory and of our staging area, Git will tell us that there are now changes to be committed. In other words, there's something in our staging area. So let's go see that in the diagram. We have our file in our working directory, and now we have copied that file into our staging area. We've added it to the staging area. And this is something I want to point out. A very common misconception is that perhaps this file moves into the staging area, but that's not the case. It gets copied into the staging area. So misconception debunked. Files are not moved from the working directory to the staging area. Files are copied from the working directory into the staging area. All right, let's now get back to the desktop and let's make our first commit. So in order to make a commit, we're going to use the git commit command with the -m option, and we're going to pass in a message. And in this case, I'm just going to call it first commit. Normally, your commit message should reference, what you're changing in this version of your project. But in this case, this is just for demonstration purposes. So once I press enter, my first commit will be made. And we can see that we get, it's telling us that the commit is on branch master, and we're going to go over branches later on. It's giving me the first 7 characters of that 40 character hash that I mentioned acts like a name for the commit, a way to reference to it. And it's giving me the message that I just gave it. Just like the staging area is represented by the index, the commit history, where all my commits live, is represented by the objects folder. So this is where all our commits basically live. Now, another really great command to use is the git log command. And basically what the git log command does is it gives us all the commits in our repository in reverse chronological order. So right now we just have 1 commit in our repository. This is the commit in our repository. It has the 40 character hash. It has who made the commit and the time at which they made that commit, as well as the message that was passed in. So let's go back to the presentation. So what we just did now is we made a commit, and now that commit is in our commit history. All right, now I'm going to go into the second part of the presentation, in which I'm going to go over the staging area in a bit more depth. So when we made this commit, sometimes people believe that our staging area is now empty because, I don't know, things moved from the staging area to the commit, but that's not really the case. The staging area is not empty. At any given point in time, you're looking at a version of your project. You're on a particular commit. And when you're on a commit, it's the files that are part of that commit that are in your staging area. So another misconception debunked. The staging area is not empty. The staging area has all the files of the commit that you're currently on. So here I have another project. In this project, I have 4 files: chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. I have already made a commit, and I'm on this commit, and therefore all the files that are part of the commit are in my staging area. So let's go to the desktop and show that. Basically, I'm going to close this. I'm going to open up a new window with my new project folder that I've already created. It's on my desktop. It's called Novella. There we go. I'm going to close this. And we can open up the Finder window as well. So that's there. You can see that it's already a repository. It has the .git folder there. So we have chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all basically empty files. Let me go into that folder, Novella. And I'm going to type in git log. And we can see what I said just now is that we have 1 commit And in this commit, I've basically said that I've added chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to chapters 3 and 4. And then we're going to see what happens, how we can add files to the staging area and how we can remove them as well. Before I get started though, I'm just going to use the git status command. And basically what Git is telling me right now is that we're on branch master. Once again, we'll go over branches later. There's nothing to commit, the working tree is clean. Basically what Git is telling me is that the files in my working directory and the files in my staging area are exactly the same. So there's nothing to add to my staging area, and there's nothing in my staging area that's ready to be committed. But we're going to change this now because I'm going to make some changes to the chapter 3 and chapter 4 files. So I'm going to go into chapter 3 and I'm going to type in chapter 3, save. And then I'm going to go into chapter 4 and type in chapter 4. I mean, I could be adding a lot more information to these chapters of my novella, but for now, I'm just going to keep it simple. So now let's use the git status command again. And now it tells me, all right, you've made some changes. They are in your working directory, but it's telling me your changes are not staged for commit. In other words, it's telling me the changes are in the working directory, but they're not in your staging area. So let's add these changes to the staging area. I'm going to use the git add command and pass in the dot again so that I don't have to give the name of each file. Press enter. And if I use git status, now it's telling me, all right, now your changes are ready to be committed because they are in my staging area. So let's go see that in the diagram. So what we just did now was we were in our working directory. We made changes to chapter 3 and 4. So you can imagine that if we had the version 1 of these files, we've made changes and it's kind of like the version of the files is now the second version. And then Git was telling us, all right, these things are in your working directory, but they're not in your staging area. So we added these files to the staging area with the git add command. Now, what happens if I actually decide that I don't want to include the things I had done in my chapter 4.txt file in my next version of my project or in my next commit? Let's assume I had written a bunch of stuff in this chapter, but it wasn't ready to be saved or committed yet, and I wanted to take that updated file out of my staging area. I can do that. Like I mentioned before, the staging area is like a rough draft space. You can add and remove files, and you can really craft what you want to include in your next version of your project. So in order to remove the file from the staging area, I can use the git reset command, pass in head in capital letters. I'll go over what that is in the branches section, dash dash, and then the name of the file that I want to take out of the staging area. So in this case, that's chapter 4.txt. All right, when I press enter, it's going to tell me you've unstaged these changes. So now if I give the git status command, it's going to tell me, all right, so you have something in your staging area that's ready to be committed. It's the chapter 3 file, but you also have changes that you've made to chapter 4, but they're only in your working directory. They're not in your staging area, so they're not going to be included in your next commit. So now we can make our commit with the git commit command, and we can just say second commit. All right. And if we use the git log command, we can see that we have our first commit and our second commit. And you can note that the commit hashes are always unique, so they're different. So let's go back to the diagram and see this. So we decided that we didn't want to include the changes we'd made to our chapter 4 in our next version of our project. So we decided to remove those changes, and it basically reverted back to the previous version of the file that we had. And then we made another commit. And this is our second commit. So that was the staging area in depth, and really showing how it is a rough draft space and how you can really craft what you want to include in the next version of your project, in the next commit. Now we're going to go over branches, because we've been mentioning a couple of things about branches. And now we're going to explain what those really are in Git. So in order to do that, we're going to really focus on the commit history. So let's go to the desktop. Now I want to open up this .git folder and we're going to look inside it. I want to point out the refs folder. So let's open that up. And then inside the refs folder, there's a heads folder. Open that up. And we find this file called master. So let's double click into master. So what is master? Oh, master has a 40-character hash in it. And this 40-character hash is the same as this one. So let me just put that to the side so you can see that. These two 40-character hashes are the same. So what is a branch in Git? A branch is simply a pointer to a commit. And that is why here you can see that we have master in parentheses next to this commit. Basically, master is pointing to this commit. So let's see that in the diagram. So we can see that we have a pointer called master pointing to this commit. So let's go back to our, so misconception debunked. Branches are not like tree branches. This is a really common mental model people have. People think, oh, branches, kind of like tree branches. Not really. Branches are simply pointers to commits. So let's go back to the desktop and check out branches a bit more. So in order to see a list of all the branches we have, we use the git branch command. Right now, we only have one branch. It's called master. The reason is that it's called master is just because that's just the default name for the first branch that you have when you make a repository. So the branch that we're on is always going to be highlighted in green and have an asterisk next to it. So if we want to make another branch, we use the git branch command again, and we pass in the name of a branch that doesn't yet exist. So in this case, I'm going to call it feature 1. When I press enter, we're going to see that another file is going to be created here. So enter, another file was created. Let's see what's inside this file. Once again, another hash. And basically, if I do a git log now again, we're going to see that feature 1 and master both point to this latest commit. So basically, when you make a branch, it will point to the commit that you're on when you make the branch. So we were on this commit, so now our branch is pointing to this commit, basically. And if we use that git branch command again, press enter, we can see that now we have 2 branches, but importantly, we are still on the master branch. So this is something interesting with Git. Just because you make a branch doesn't mean that you switch into that branch or that you're on that branch. You have to explicitly switch into that branch. So let's go just check out our diagram and see how this is all shown here. So at the moment, we've made another branch and it points to our latest commit. So we have the feature 1 branch and the master branch. All right. So now we want to switch branches. How does that happen? And also, what is head? First of all, let's go over what head is, because we've been seeing that for a while, but we haven't really talked about what it is. So when I open up the head file, we see that it has a reference to one of our branches. So it's telling us within the refs folder, within the heads folder, there's a master file. So basically what head is it's telling us which branch we're on. So head is a pointer to the branch that we're currently on. And that's why here you can see head is literally pointing to master. So let's go see that in the diagram. So head is just another pointer that points to master. So how do we switch branches? How do we change which branch we're on? In order to do that, we're going to use another command, the git checkout command. And we're going to pass in the name of the branch that we want to check out or switch onto. We're going to pass in the name, feature 1. Now I'm just going to close that. All right. And then when I press enter, it's going to tell me, all right, I have switched to branch feature 1. And now if I open up this head file again, we're going to see that it's now referencing the feature 1 branch. And the other thing we can do is we can do git log. And now we can see that head is literally pointing to feature 1. So that's basically what head is. Let's see that in the diagram. So what we just did was we switched onto feature 1, and head is telling us, all right, now you're on the feature 1 branch. So finally, let's just make another commit. We actually have changes in our working directory that we can add to the staging area and make a commit and include in the next version of our project. So let's just add those changes, and we're going to make a commit. And I'm going to just say third commit. These are really not descriptive messages. All right. So we've just made our third commit. If I do a git log now, I can see that our master branch still points to our second commit, but now our feature 1 branch points to this commit. And we can see that in the files. So feature 1 now points to this latest commit, but master still simply points to our second commit. And with this, I wanted to demonstrate that when you make a commit, it's the branch that you're currently on when you make that commit that will be updated to point to that latest commit. So let's see that in the diagram. Basically, we made a commit, and then the feature 1 branch updated to point to that latest commit. And that was basically it. This was sort of a introduction to Git basics, how we make commits, what's really happening. As I showed those diagrams in the very beginning that are often used to learn Git, I find those extremely simple, and they don't help me get a good mental model of how Git works. So we just covered the differences between Git and GitHub. We made a commit and went over that in depth. And we also went over the staging area in depth. And lastly, branches, which are basically just pointers to commits.